Organization for Migration, in 2017, there have been 157,689 arrivals to Europe via a range of routes across Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, with an estimated 2,824 dead or missing on Mediterranean routes. There are many more people crossing state borders across the world, including over 600,000 Rohingya, estimated to have crossed into Bangladesh, and hundreds of thousands of people fleeing violence in the Central African Republic. Some people crossing borders are categorized as refugees, while others are not. UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, states on its website that, and I quote, migrants are fundamentally different from refugees and thus are treated very differently under international law. Though it explains that migrants and refugees increasingly make use of the same routes and means of transport to get to an overseas destination, it adds, again quoting, that migrants, especially economic migrants, choose to move in order to improve their lives, while refugees, it says, are forced to flee to save their lives or preserve their freedom. Is the UNHCR right to claim that migrants are fundamentally different from refugees? If so, how is the distinction to be drawn, and why exactly does it matter? What is the relationship between migration and refugeehood, and what does this mean for internally displaced people? Is the existing legal definition of a refugee fit for purpose, and what might be the implications of seeking to modify that definition? I'm Sarah Fine from the Department of Philosophy at King's College London, and with me to debate these pressing issues, we have a fantastic panel, and I'll introduce them now. Ahmad Al-Rashid is an author, Syrian campaigner, and violence, conflict and development postgraduate at SOAS, and is now working for the International Organization for Migration. You may recognize him from the extraordinary BBC documentary Exodus, Our Journey to Europe, with footage shot by refugees en route to Europe, and which followed Ahmad on his own long and dangerous journey to the UK. And Exodus is now available on iPlayer. Phillip Cole, at the end, is a senior lecturer in politics and international relations at the University of the West of England, Bristol. His books include Philosophies of Exclusion, Liberal Political Theory and Immigration, The Myth of Evil, and with Christopher Heath-Wellman, Debating the Ethics of Immigration. He's also co-editor of the recent collection, Understanding Statelessness, and is a wonderful model and inspiration for those like me who study the ethics of migration. Elspeth Guild is John Monnet Professor ad personam at Queen Mary University of London, Professor of European Migration Law at the University of Nijmegen in the Netherlands, and is a partner in the immigration team at the London law firm Kingsley Natley. She regularly teaches lawyers and judges in the EU about issues of EU borders and migration law, and acts as an expert on immigration issues for organisations such as the Council of Europe, UNHCR, the European Commission and Parliament, the House of Commons, and the House of Lords. Thank you for joining us. So I'd like to begin our discussion tonight with a brief outline of the legal landscape, as we'll need to have some picture of that before we can consider any problems with existing definitions and practices. So I'm going to start with our legal expert and ask for a sense of the current state of play. So Elspeth, can you tell us about the core of the international legal definition of a refugee? And could you also explain for us the differences between an asylum seeker and a refugee, and also outline the pathways to being formally recognized as a refugee?
Thank you very much, and it's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. It's very nice to be here. If we start with the question of who is a refugee, the question is wonderfully well defined because we have an international convention, the UN Refugee Convention from 1951, widely ratified by states across the world, and which defines who is a refugee. So a refugee is someone who is outside his or her country of nationality, as opposed to an internally displaced person. and who has a well-founded fear of persecution on the basis of race, religion, nationality, membership of a social group, or political opinion. Now, that definition sounds very straightforward, and what those who fulfill the definition are entitled to is they are entitled to what's called non-refoulement, and that is the right not to be sent to a place where they fear persecution under the Convention. So we have quite a clear definition. We have an obligation on states in respect of refugees who arrive in the territory. And the question is, where is the problem? The problem really arises, first of all, in definition. How do we define what is persecution? We know from the fairly recent past that even fairly simple terms of international law, like what is torture, can become highly disputed among liberal democracies. We have the question of the nexus. The person has to be persecuted on the basis of one of the 5 grounds. What are those 5 grounds? And in the Convention itself, there are a number of grounds for exclusion. So even if someone fulfills the requirements, they may be excluded on grounds of national security, usually defined broadly in terms of terrorism, war crimes, etc. When refugees arrive, they leave their country of origin where they fear persecution. They arrive in another country. The authorities of that country need to receive an application from them, they need to claim protection, and the authorities need an opportunity to assess whether the person is indeed a refugee or whether the person does not, in fact, fulfill the criteria, and then perhaps does not need international protection. And so states have created the terminology of the asylum seeker. A refugee is a refugee from the moment the conditions come into being. It's a bit like, am I a citizen or am I not a citizen? I'm a citizen from the moment that I'm born a citizen, and if I have documents or not, that's another matter. A refugee is someone in the same position, is a refugee from the moment the conditions are fulfilled. But states say, well, we need to assess whether the conditions are fulfilled, and that, during that period, the refugee is termed an asylum seeker. The story of the refugee doesn't end in 1951 or with the widening of the Convention in 1967, but the international community has been particularly anxious to protect people who fear persecution and torture. And in 1984, a new UN convention was opened, the Convention Against Torture, which includes this non-refoulement principle: you cannot return someone to a country where he or she fears, where there is real risk for someone suffering torture. 1984 isn't the end of the story, because we also have in 2006 the UN Convention on the Prohibition of Enforced Disappearances, where once again we introduce the principle of non-refoulement. States are prohibited from returning people to a country where there is a real risk that he or she will suffer an enforced disappearance. So, at least at the international level, we have an anxiety among states that perhaps the refugee definition isn't wide enough. And to resolve that anxiety, what we've done is we've taken the core principle of non-refoulement, that you must protect someone from persecution, and included it in human rights conventions about torture, enforced disappearance, etc. So the story is not so much a story of failure or of lack. It's a story of the need for international solidarity and proper implementation.
Okay, wonderful. And could you just tell us as well, when, if ever, does somebody stop being a refugee?
Well, if a person is a refugee, then they will cease to be a refugee when they no longer need protection. So the situation changes in the country of origin, the person can go back, the person acquires citizenship in the state where he or she is living, no longer needs to rely on the refugee status because they now have the right to live in another country. So primarily it's about cessation for one reason or another. There are very limited circumstances where someone who's been recognized as a refugee can in fact be sent back to their country of origin, and someone who is at risk of torture. This can never apply. But, question mark, what happens to the asylum seeker who says, I was and always have been a refugee, and the state which says, no, you're not, prove it to me. I don't believe you. And there I think we have the core of the difference. We have differences in recognition rates of asylum seekers from the same countries of origin. I'll take the example of Ahmad's country of origin, Syria, where in some member states, the latest statistics I saw for Europe showed one member state recognizing 0 Syrians as refugees, and other member states recognizing 99%.
Okay, thank you very much for that really helpful introduction. At this point, does anybody have any questions for Elspeth on the legal landscape? Okay, I'll take 2 questions. We wait for the microphone. We've got one here, and then after that, we'll take a question from the lady at the back with her hand up there.
So in the definition you talked about social groups. That seems like quite a broad term. So how do legal scholars and governments define it in a way that it seems overly permissive?
And we'll take a question from that lady at the back.
Sorry, I'm still not absolutely clear about the difference between asylum seeker and refugee. And also, I'm thinking of that because I don't think you included LGBT. I wonder how they be in that circumstance. I just was interested to know about the legal situation there.
Thank you very much, Elspeth. Social groups and asylum seeker refugees.
Yes. In terms of the definition of a refugee, race, religion, nationality, membership of a social group, and political opinion, social group is the ground for being a refugee, which perhaps has come into its own over the last 15 years. It is the ground that covers people who are being persecuted, not for anything other reasons, but because the state authorities or indeed non-state actors see them in some way as forming a social group, representing views for which the persecutors are willing to persecute them. LGBTI is a classic example of a group which have received refugee status, have been recognized as refugees on the basis of social group from countries where, for instance, there is the criminalization and even the death penalty for LGBTI activities. An asylum seeker becomes a refugee in the eyes of the state when the state recognizes the refugee as a refugee. So the state recognizes someone who's claimed asylum, the asylum seeker in the eyes of the state, and by recognizing the person, for the state's own purposes, that person is a refugee. So it's as if you arrive, you say, help, I'm going to be persecuted if you send me back. The state says, yes, please fill in 15 forms, you'll have an interview in 2 weeks. You fill in the forms, you have your interview, the state says, yes, you are a refugee. Now, in international law, you've always been a refugee. But for the state's purposes, you were an asylum seeker until the state examined your case and decided that you were a refugee, but with that retroactive effect. It's as if you arrive at the airport in the UK and you say, I'm a British citizen, but I've lost my passport. And the immigration officer says, well, you probably are, you're probably not, I'm not quite sure what to do with you, but here are a whole pile of papers, fill in all these forms, we'll give you an interview in a couple of weeks, and if we can establish you're a British citizen, then you're entitled to be here, and if you're not, we'll send you back to where you came
Okay, thank you very much. That's great. So I'm going to move on now to ask all our panelists a question. And this is, do you think that the international legal definition is in need of modification? And if so, why? And I'd also like to hear about any problems that you've identified with the processes involved in being recognized as a refugee. So here I'd like to start with Ahmad.
Thank you very much. I think I'm going to talk about practical things. I mean, through my experience, working, being a Syrian refugee in some countries back in the Middle East, and the cases of other Syrians. I mean, one of the things that I first came across, after I crossed the Syrian borders into the Iraqi Kurdish region, northern Iraq, the first thing I met was a group of people, from officials, or we'll say immigration people. They said, "You are a guest." So they even did not tell me that you are an asylum seeker or even a refugee. So in northern Iraq, because of the politics of that country, I was seen not as an asylum seeker, not as a refugee. When they tell me that you are, as a brother, because of my ethnicity, that you're a Kurdish brother who's coming from Syria to Iraq, so it meant that I'm at home, that I needed to respect, kind of the regulations or whatever rules that they set. But on the other hand, they deprived me from kind of, the legal definitions, because there was no one that told me that this is, why it means to be an asylum seeker, this is what it means to be a refugee, these are your rights. At the same time, I've had family members and friends moved into, and fled to Turkey, and the rhetoric by the officials in that country, and even the media was, "We are welcoming our brothers and sisters from Syria." So they are guests for the time being, And again, if you look on a bigger picture, what is the definition of a guest? What does this mean for me? And for how long I'm going to be a guest, And I think in 2013, 11, 12, 13, 14, and later on, Turkey came with a definition called temporary protection, for Syrian refugees. Because again, they kind of understood that the situation in Syria is going to be a protracted situation, and they need kind of they need to look at other solutions, because they cannot kind of send them back to Syria, and for some people, like being integrated within Turkey is very difficult. So they wanted kind of a resettlement into a third country. So they were introduced the kind of temporary protection, which was a kind of a way, in order to allow Syrians, some Syrians, a window for them to be resettled. So in terms of the definitions, if you go back to the Middle East, we were never told that what are our rights, For example, I remember going to some refugee camps, in northern Iraq and even in Turkey. When you go and you're out to the refugee camp, and you'll be given kind of a list, a piece of paper, which was, okay, you are a refugee. These are your rights. These are your numbers. These are these emails, and they're all technical terms. You do not understand them, and people do not know. And if you go to an official, you need to go and ask someone who is kind of has the right to give you a legal advice. I'm not in a position, and then you're in the survival mood. You do not care about all these definitions. All you care about is your family, or your kind of instant needs like food and water and shelter. So I know, for example, friends and other people who have been living in Turkey the last 5 or 6 years, and they still cannot distinguish between refugee and asylum seeker and a guest or whatever. So I believe that there's a deliberate, kind of policy by some governments, I would say, to kind of to remove this word from the radar, because it means for them that they must be kind of entitled or committed to provide these people with the services. It means providing healthcare, education care, or even access to kind of citizenship and other durable solutions. So in the Middle East, at least, I think there's a big kind of lack of understanding of, a deliberate, kind of obscuring of this, because when you say brothers and sisters and guests, it's just a vague. It has no meaning, you know. And then we find some political, let's say, parties using this for their ends. And when it comes to the European, you know, let's say, situation, you know, okay, they say refugees and asylum seekers, so there've been hundreds of thousands, you know, of refugees and asylum seekers, you know, but still, when it comes to, you know, practice, there's no standardization, because an African, what is it, a person from Eritrea could be recognized as a refugee in the UK, and not a refugee, let's say, in Finland or let's say in Sweden. The same thing, you know, a Syrian refugee could be recognized in Germany, but in another. So I think there is a kind of lack of understanding, you know, of, well, I don't know, again, lack of understanding might not be the right word, but I think there's a lot of confusion, especially after kind of populist move, you know, and the rise of the right wing in across Europe. And if you see, you know, Donald Trump, for example, the US government on building walls, you know, and refugees and all this stuff, who is a refugee, for example? Who is a refugee? But again, this is all kind of broad things. But if you bring it back to the single thing about who is a refugee, as you mentioned in your definition, is a person who's fleeing, you know, persecution, is fleeing after his life, and as kind of after World War II, the international community said, no, we need to protect the refugees because this is kind of a huge. But again, because the problem is it's Eurocentric, you know, it always looked at things from a European kind of point of view. So it's challenging, because even now there have been some people suggesting that we need to modify, you know, the refugee term to make it more strict. Because it's still already, it's very tough. It's security based, you know, a definition. But still, they wanted to make it more and more kind of strict in terms of who can access the right of being a refugee or not.
Thank you very much. And over to Phil, if you could give us a sense of the philosophical debate around this question.
Sure, thanks, Sarah. Just before I do that, just to add to the legal complexity, not all states have ratified and signed the UNHCR Convention, or the 67 Protocol, Bangladesh, for example, which is very interesting to see what's happening.
I can't hear your voice.
Sorry, apologies. One legal complication is not all states have signed and ratified the UNHCR Convention or the Protocol, and I gave the example of Bangladesh, which hasn't ratified the convention, which is interesting given the situation in Bangladesh at the moment. So that's just to add a kind of extra dimension to the legal complexity. The question, where's the philosophical debate? Actually, interestingly, given what Ahmed just said, there's actually a view in the academic community that we shouldn't actually be discussing this. Because, as he said, there is in the political class, in political rulers, they would like to narrow it, not broaden it, but narrow it. So Theresa May gave a hint recently that she would quite like to have a narrow definition. So some academics have suggested it's just not responsible for us to start this debate because we don't know where it's going to go. I don't agree with that. I don't think you can separate academic debates from the public sphere. I think we're in the public sphere, given what's happening about and things like that, even our lectures in the public sphere at the moment. So we're not in this kind of sealed off world. We are the public sphere, we're part of it. So I don't agree with that. So if Theresa May might be in the room somewhere, giving up some comments and ideas, but that's the way we go. All right. In terms of content, I think where a lot of theorists go is looking at a human rights-based approach. So one definition would be something like a refugee is someone whose fundamental human rights can't be met without migration. So a human rights-based approach, the fundamental human rights can't be met where they are. They can only happen if they leave that state. If you want to go in that direction, they're very complex questions. You've got to answer what is a fundamental human right, what's going to count. Would it be possible to meet those rights in some other way other than migration, such as humanitarian intervention into the territory of that state? So there's an argument about what's called alternative to flight strategies. Can we do something which makes flight not necessary? So those two questions what is a fundamental human right and when is humanitarian intervention and obligation, those are very complex. And if you add that to the refugee question, you see we've got a lot of work to do. The other thing I'd add is to do with the inclusion of the refugee voice in this debate, that one of the key stakeholders in the debate about who is a refugee is the refugee. And the processes, both political and policy processes, I think don't recognise the refugee as a stakeholder. So one interesting thing I want to look at is how do you include the refugee voice at all levels of this so that they get work, because they're the key stakeholder here and they're regarded as kind of passive objects, a problem to be solved rather than the people who really have the problem. So how do we include the refugee voice in this process for me is a key question.
Okay, thank you. And Elspeth, how would you respond to this question about problems with the existing definition and the process?
Yes, I think that one of the things that we need to always bear in mind is that conventions do useful heavy lifting in the field of refugees and in the field of human rights, and that we see the principle of non-refoulement being taken up in many more instruments to provide for an ever-increasing number of people. So bearing in mind the first comments, I would say we don't need to go back and redefine the refugee. We need conventions that cover more people. So why do we not have a non-refoulement provision in respect of people fleeing environmental disaster? Why don't we extend outward? So instead of opening all the risks of these older conventions where there may be some politicians that have got it under their skin that they really don't like them, and instead move forward otherwise. And I think that would perhaps be a better way to provide more protection for people who are removing it. And I think that events like this, one sees that people do recognize and want to protect their neighbours, people from around the world who need to flee to find protection. I don't think that we live in a world where refugees are unwelcome. We live in a world where there's a tremendous cleavage between the people who states say are refugees and are welcome, and the people who states say are not refugees, just pretending to be refugees, and whether or not those people are getting a genuine right.
So how do you see the move of more conventions as improving the prospects for protection over the option of trying to expand the definition of a refugee itself? Why would that be the better move in your view?
Well, I think that the Refugee Convention has served us all quite well over time. Yes, we still need more ratifications. Turkey hasn't ratified the Refugee Convention. Bangladesh, we need to keep working on ratifications of the convention. But we have other conventions, like the Convention Against Torture, which is very widely ratified around the world. And so you could say that you are better protected against being sent back to a place where there's a real risk that you will be tortured, because more countries have ratified the convention, than you are to a country where you suffer persecution on a refugee ground. The 2006 Enforced Disappearances Convention is still in the early days of ratification, but it's been signed by most Europeans, and it provides yet another base. Why could we not have a similar convention for the environment?
Okay, thank you very much. So I'll open the floor now to questions. Does anybody have a question about this particular discussion around the existing definitions of a refugee? Okay, I'll take a question from over here. Oh, sorry.
The question is economic, it's been provided as not worth anyone's time. I'm sure you understand the purpose of the question. So, but how could that, within the realistic idea of existing political structures, how could we move it a bit and include them as well as also said about climate change refugees? What about just development refugees?
Okay, Where was the other question? Right over here, I'll take this question.
Thank you all for your insightful comments. I'm intrigued by Ahmad's comment on refugees being labeled as guests in the Middle East. I completely agree that that's such an interesting point. My question then is, given that the majority of the world's refugees are hosted and maintained in the global south, do you then suggest that, say, countries in the Middle East start extending citizenship for the refugees that are currently there? Or would you suggest that Europe and the US and the global north in general takes up more refugees? What do you think is a more sustainable solution for the world as it is right now? Thank you.
Great. Should we start with Ahmad in response to these questions?
Thank you very much. I mean, I'm going to talk about Syria and the Syrian refugee crisis because this is something, you know, I'm Syrian myself, so I can talk about the situation in the different countries. I mean, if you talk about what you suggested, you know, granting citizenship to Syrian refugees, let's say in Lebanon. Lebanon is a country of 4 million people, and over 1 million Syrians are living there as refugees. So this is 25% of that entire population, and the majority of them are Arab Sunnis. You know, so politically, this will be a disaster because Christians are very worried, Shia are very worried, other, you know, political, you know, they are very worried about because they're gonna change. It's gonna change the dynamics of power in that country. This is like the case of Turkey, for example. You know, it's a country where about over 80 million people are living there, and over 5 million Syrians are registered as refugees. You know, recently the government of the president of Erdogan, you know, hinted that we are going to give citizenship to Syrian brothers and sisters. And there was a backlash by Turkish nationalists because they have their fears that Turkishness is being invaded by Arabs, let's say. You've got a fear by Kurdish, you know, ethnicities that this is, well, the government or the AKP government is changing the dynamics for political reasons that we're resettling Syrian, you know, Arab refugees in Kurdish areas. So I think it is problematic. And I know, yes, these people, like for 5-6 years, have been living in that country, and they should have access, you know, to at least, you know, residence or you know, citizenship. But again, the politics behind it is very different. I mean, take the case of Palestinians in my country. They fled Palestine in 1948, you know, and until today, they got a special ID which says a Palestinian Syrian, so which means that you need to go back to your country. Though you've never been to that country, you've been living here for his parents have been living here. So the policy of that country is very, very complex. And if you look at the case of Jordan and the clashes, you know, between the Jordanians and the Palestinians, and the cases of, you know, the Israeli Lebanese conflict with the Palestinian factions, and it's political. It's very problematic. And one last example, for example, the case of Kurdistan region of Iraq. Where over 250,000 Syrian, mostly Kurdish ethnics, you know, are living in northern Iraq for the last 3-4 years, and this give us that citizenship, but the autonomous region cannot do it because it needs to come from Baghdad. So I think politically it's very difficult to answer this, and even resettlement is not going to solve the problem because only less than 1% of these refugees, you know, access resettlement. So I think the focus should be, okay, life-saving in the movement, the immediate needs of these people, local integration, and hopefully thinking about addressing the main causes of the problem of why these people are fleeing. Because if you look at the media today, everyone is talking about refugees, but they're addressing the symptoms of the crisis, not the real cause of the problem. If you want to solve it, look at the symptom. I know it's political, it's very complex, but you need to address it because at the first place, I would argue that 99% of these people never ever wanted to leave their country. They wanted to stay home, and they were forced to flee.
Thank you very much. Phil, would you like to respond to this question?
On the question of development refugees, if you like, climate change refugees, I'm in agreement with Elspeth that what you probably need to look at is not expanding the existing refugee convention but looking at other conventions to cover internally displaced people and environmentally displaced people. At the moment, what you have is what's called soft law solutions to these questions, which are kind of local agreements or guidances. There's no binding international treaties giving these people rights as they are for refugees. So what I would want to see is a move towards having some kind of internationally recognised binding, legally binding agreements which give these kind of groups protection. So I am sympathetic with that. On the question of the global south, global north relationship, what we know is, we know the figures about 84% of refugees being hosted in the global south. The global north really is putting as many obstacles as possible to people getting to the global north to claim asylum. We know what Italy is doing with the Libyan, various Libyan organisations to make it hard for people to come across the Mediterranean. They've been largely successful. The numbers crossing the Mediterranean have fallen because of these measures. How many people are dying because of these measures, we don't know. We know the number of people dying in the Mediterranean. We don't know how many died trying to get to the Mediterranean. So we know the global north is doing its best to stop people getting to safety. Because I think one of the problems with the convention, we have the non-refoulement condition, which you have the right not to be sent back to danger, but you don't have the right to escape danger. So the question of safe passage, how you provide safe passage for people, becomes absolutely crucial.
Thank you. Elspeth.
Yes, I must say we're going to be in agreement on quite a number of things. So I would just add on the question of the difference between an economic migrant and a refugee. And the key is, does this person need protection from what will happen to him or her in the country of origin? So if the person is going to suffer torture or persecution in the country of origin, be it for an economic reason, a development reason, or whatever, then that person, in my view, should be entitled to protection in another country. We have the whole problem of the non-trade policies, promoted very much by Europe and North America. If nobody can get to your borders, then nobody can apply for asylum. And I think that's a very, very substantial problem that needs to be dealt with. Fortunately, it's not the whole world, it's only parts of the world, mind you. The Rohingya to Bangladesh weren't exactly having a very easy time of it. But I think that we need to address that from the call in the development world for responsible border controls. And I think that if we want to think about responsible border controls in the international community, then we have to think very carefully about what border controls should be. Responsible border controls are not those which create death at the border on the way to the border.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll take a couple more questions now and then we'll move on. I see one over there, that man at the back there. Yes, you wave your hand so they know who. Yes, great. And we'll take one here at the front afterwards.
Thank you very much. My question from the panel, do you believe that international community has done its job properly regarding about the refugee? Because I believe, which I think, the more responsible international community for the responsibility of refugee. What happened disaster in the Syria or like Afghanistan and some other country? So why first we look at why the people that come into refugee? And my another question is that regarding which Ahmad mentioned about neighbors. It's more responsible not belongs to the people which they involved in the country and they like in the war inside in the country. Like I can say like Syria. They're not involved like for example NATO or Russia, they're involved there. So they get more responsibility for these people, at least they take like people as a refugee or make us stop the war in this country or make us another solution for them. Instead, they go people to get a refugee out of their country.
So was that second question,
Yeah,
who should take responsibility? Okay, thank you. And then we have a question here at the front. Can you raise your hand again? This man here at the front.
I'm just wondering whether those powers who create refugees, for instance, like United States, you say, or the Israeli lobby, for instance, in Iraq, the Americans created in Libya the problems, the refugees, or in case of Iraq, you see now the position is. And so in Syria, where aiding and abetting by the Saudi Arabia, those Gulf states, you see, Dubai or the Abu Dhabi, are they not responsible for creating unnecessary refugees? This Syria was decimated, you see, by when, of course, the Assad was not a, but it could have been resolved with some sort of negotiation and resolution. But this was deliberately created under the auspices of the United States. Something that must be held responsible for creating massive refugee status all over the world.
Thank you very much. So we have the question about, has the international community done its job properly, and about who is responsible for creating and responding to refugee flows. So we'll start this time with Elspeth.
Yes, the international community and responsibility for refugees. One of the difficulties that we have as a world is that we want a strong international community, we want strong international institutions, but we also want strong sovereign states which are able to uphold human rights. Now, these two desires which we have are not antagonistic. The international community is made up of states. If states are failed states, Somalia being an example, they're not upholding anybody's human rights. And of course, Somalia is a substantial refugee-producing country. So yes, we need strong states, but then we need also states which are strong enough to stand up and to comply with the international obligations which they have undertaken. That must be seen as part of the responsibility of being a sovereign state in an international community. And one of those obligations is to behave in a manner of solidarity towards refugees. One of the things which I think we need to really take into account if we want to move the framework and the mindset about refugees, which we have at the moment in many parts of Europe, is to remember that refugees are a terrific opportunity for states which embrace them, invite them in, treat them well. They become part of the future of the state where they settle. Refugees are not a burden on host communities.
Thank you, Ahmed.
Yeah, thank you very much for your questions, and I think you raised a very important question about, well, the international community. As a Syrian person, if you go today and ask any Syrian person, okay, what is the international community doing? The first thing you would ask, okay, who is the international community? What is their postcode? Who are they? Where are they? Where can I meet them? Literally, I mean, who are they? How does this work? Because we are living today in the 21st century, in a country, in the last 5 years, the country where 22 million people have left. Today, and according to the recent figures in Syria, 500,000 people got killed. They lost their lives. Over 2 million people, got injured. About 7 million people are internally displaced, multiple displacements. Over 5 million people are taking refuge in the neighboring countries. And about 3 million children are out of education today. This all happened between 2011 and 17, and we are crazy about how advanced this world has become. And again, you say the international community, and when it comes to responsibility, I would say it's terrible what happened in Syria, what happened in Afghanistan, what's happening in Iraq, what's happening in Eritrea, and other. And I think when it comes to the international community, dealing with dictators, dealing with criminals, because you've got, the other alternatives. They got to the point that if the dictator goes, it means that the whole structure will fall. The case of Iraq, for example, Saddam Hussein is gone, Iraq is gone, Gaddafi is gone, Libya is gone. They say, okay, if Assad is gone, so it will be gone. So I believe that the international community did not stand up into its responsibility into building, institutions that will ensure that if these dictators, these butchers leave, that they could stand up. And again, I'm going to talk about Syria, for example. When it comes to the neighboring countries and the politics, I think when it all started in 2011, the borders between Syria and Turkey, they were open. They said, okay, your brothers and sisters, come and live with us. But after 2 years or 1 year and a half, they realized that there's going to be a protected situation, and they started building walls, and it became problematic. And even like in 2012 and 13, there was like a massive international gathering by the international community. They formed a group, Friends of Syria, with about 100 something, governments came together to help Syrians. And one funny example, when Khan Sheikhoun in Idlib province was attacked by a chemical weapon, we've seen Donald Trump going to TV as well. We are so sorry about the destiny and the horrible death of little baby children in Syria who killed by the criminals. 2 days later, or even like 1 week, 2 hours later as well, we are not taking in any Syrian refugees, not any refugees from 7 Muslim countries. I mean, this contradiction is beyond imagination. It's crazy. I mean, these are very scary times to be a refugee. I remember French, for example, when we kept beyond red dots up north in that country, we were putting something, a badge in our hand just because we happened to be refugees, like the David the Star, one of the Jewish refugees. And I think, I would say again, who to blame? First of all, we blame ourselves, Syrians, because we started it. But we cannot stop it. It's not about us anymore. And I do blame the media. I will blame, again, the conscious world, that let this happen. And I would also blame the working companies, the media giants who deceived us, and they stole our dream, of just living as a human being, just right without being feared or tortured. But I think, we've learned. So I think, we've learned, but it was too late for us. I mean, what does that mean?
Thank you. Phil.
Thanks. On the causal responsibility question, I think I'd go with Joseph Cairns, who's a great theorist of the ethics of migration. He says there are kind of 3 rationales here for taking in refugees. One is purely humanitarian, one is causal responsibility. And the third one, which he says is probably the right one, is it's to do with the international state system. So refugees are created by the failure of the state system. If states have an interest in that system working, then all states have an equal responsibility to take refugees. So it's an international responsibility to take them wherever they come from. The problem with the causal responsibility, although it's tempting to aim at certain states, is that another state can say, look, they're not our problem. We didn't do anything, it's their problem over there, so we're not going to take them in. So some people are very cautious and included about that, although it has an attraction. On the international community, the point is that the international community is failing on this. UNHCR has 3 durable solutions to the refugee situation. One is repatriation, where refugees go home. The other is local integration, giving citizenship. The other is resettlement. And if you look at the numbers, in all of those, if you combine them all, probably less than 10% of refugees are moving through any of those systems. They're really stuck where they are. So the international community is failing in that sense. So we have to rethink how can we undo this logjam where the vast majority of refugees are simply stuck in refugee camps. Ahmed mentioned protracted refugee situations, which I think more than half the refugee population of what defined as protracted refugee situations. That is a situation where no one can see when it's going to end. And the average one now, I recently looked, it's 26 years. 26 years is your average time of a protracted refugee situation. So we're stuck, and the international community is failing.
Thank you very much. So now we move into the final part of our discussion. And I want to mention a 1985 article titled "Who is a Refugee?" by philosopher Andrew Shacknode. And in that article, he says, interestingly enough, in a sense, being a refugee is a kind of privileged status when compared to lots of people who are on the move, or indeed who are not on the move because they're stuck where they are, and that many people would like to have the rights attached to the status of a refugee. So I want to come back to our question and ask the panel, who do you think is a refugee? Would you prefer an expanded definition, perhaps a specific one that includes more people who are on or indeed not even on the move? Do you think that any attempt to distinguish between refugees and others is going to be in some sense problematic? And do you think in practice that any attempt to try and expand this definition is going to be futile or lead to more problems? I know we've touched on some of these issues already, but I want to start with Phil here. Could you round up for us on this question?
Thank you. Yeah, I want to go back to where you started, with the way various organisations distinguish between refugees and migrants. And there are certain, because in asking the question, who is a refugee, we're also at the same time asking the question, who is not a refugee? And how we answer one question will affect the other question. Basically what we're saying, as Elspeth pointed out earlier, that if we're going to have a definition of refugee, we're saying the refugee has a set of international protections, which the people who fall outside the definition, they're not going to have. So what are we going to do about those? That group? And environmental climate change is certainly a key one, which I think is very, very challenging. Internally displaced persons, a very important one, but I think the economic migrant, the economic migrant's often the villain of this piece, and if you're going to distinguish refugees, and it's the economic migrant who gets the finger pointed at them. And again, we go back to what you said at the start, Sarah, that the standard distinction is the economic migrant chooses to move to improve their lives. And if you look at the people who fall under the category of being economic migrants, who are fleeing extreme poverty and deprivation, to say they're not forced to move is really, it doesn't stand up for more than a split second. It's just will depend on rates of definition what is to be forced to move. So we have to be aware of both sides of this question, I think. I go back to Elspeth's point that we don't have to expand the definition to include all these groups, as long as we say something about them and have maybe different conventions and different agreements to cover them. So it's not necessarily going to be an endlessly expanding project of the current definition. However, having said that, there's still a lot of work to do on the refugee definition itself, because it is target-based, it is persecution-based, and what we know is the vast majority of people fleeing military violence are not necessarily targets of that violence. They're just in the way. They're not being persecuted directly. So there are other definitions around. There's the Cartagena definition of refugee for Latin America, which is much more close to our kind of average view of who a refugee is. The African Union has a much more generous definition it works with. So I think to stick with what we've got, there's still a lot of work we need to do with it. It is, in one sense, it's a product of the history. It was written during the Cold War to address a Cold War issue. Actually, one of my students, when we were discussing this a couple of weeks ago, said it looks like a kind of global north definition. It doesn't look like a definition which applies globally. So I think we do have to look at it and do have to advise it.
Thank you, Elspeth.
Yes, I think that what I would want to add here is that what we really need are good rights, well described, that apply to people who are in need of international protection, who are at risk of non-refoulement, but who are not refugees. So they may be people whose right to non-refoulement comes from the real risk of torture, the forced disappearance, etc. And their rights are not set out in these international conventions. So they get only the non-refoulement. And then they don't get, for instance, rights to equality, right to work, your right to all of the things which are so important to building a new life in a new country. So I think that building in these rights is going to be one of the keys. And the other thing which I think is terribly important, if we're going to come to terms with providing protection to those people who need it, is proper and generous implementation by states.
Thank you, Ahmad.
I think, given the current political situation, I would go that the least we could do today is at least to stick to the current refugee convention, because if we lose it, we lose it. Because globally there is no consensus. Look what's happening in the US, in this country. I mean, there is no consensus whatsoever in that country. So I would say, losing the current, the refugee convention with all its imperfections, would be a disaster. So at least maintaining it, with all its problems, still would be a plus for many people. I would say millions of lives. One thing I would like to talk about when it comes to this, refugees, and because this is an experience that I've been through, between Turkey and when I made it to Greece, you started to feel like, even when it comes to the definition of a refugee, it's kind of categorization and classification. So it's a very trendy thing to be a Syrian refugee in Europe. Honestly, but it's very problematic if you are a refugee, let's say from Eritrea or Ethiopia or even Afghanistan. I know it's political, but again, like this discrimination, between refugees, that you are Syrian, you are from this, you are from that, and it's problematic. It's creating divisions, among these people. Because I remember, like, on one of the Greek islands, there was like 2 refugee camps where Syrians are kept here. I would say like in 5 stars refugee camps, and kind of other nationalities are kept. I mean, this situation was problematic. It was creating a lot of hatred. I think it's kind of a tool by some policymakers, because it's creating division and kind of stealing the attention from the main problem into kind of trivial things. And again, in terms of would you like it to be redefined or modified? Yes, it should be because at the end of the day, this is a humanitarian crisis. And for many of these people are fleeing wars and dictatorships and persecution. It is a humanitarian crisis. And I do appreciate the security concerns, in Europe, in the US, all over the globe, with the rise of terrorism and ISIS. These governments or these states, they do have the right to take security measures. But again, you cannot make everything related to security. But I understand this is how the politics of the states work. And again, when globally, if you look at the numbers, and again, this is kind of, in a world where around over 6 billion people are living, and about 65 million refugees and displaced people, the number is nothing. Today we are very rich. I mean, if you look at Europe, over 500 million people are living in the biggest economic, political, bloc on earth. They're making all this fuss about the refugee crisis. In 2015, they called it a crisis. Lebanon, Turkey, Iraq, and Jordan, dealing with it for years and years, and they did not make a fuss about it. So again, I would really appreciate kind of a new approach to look at it from a humanitarian, perspective. Not from a Eurocentric, so like, and again to involve the refugees, because if you never feel the pain, it's very difficult. Yeah, I meet some people who meet you, yeah, I understand what you've been through. You will never understand. You've never seen a person being turned into pieces in front of your eyes. You've never seen a person, being beheaded in front of your eyes. You've never seen a father throwing his wife, and his children into the sea because he wanted to save one little child. You've never seen this. How on earth you could understand this? You need to involve these people, and you need to make it more humane. And more importantly, if there were kind of policies on place, to prevent, the main causes of this problem. You wouldn't have this problem in Europe. There wouldn't be a crisis, and it's a problem because they call it a crisis. I do not see it as a crisis. I see it as a new golden opportunity. There was recently a book called Refuge by Alexander Betts and Paul Collier, and they mentioned that 50% of Syrians with university and treaty, degree are today in Europe. These are the most intelligent, people in that country today are in Europe. Doctors, engineers, all these people are there. This country is going to make. These people are going to make a lot of contributions. I mean, take the case of Germany, for example. Over 4,000 Syrian doctors are living today in Germany. Imagine how much money it would cost Germany, say, from the day the doctor is born till the day he's graduated. And suddenly you have 3,000 up to 4,000 doctors ready-made. You just need 1 to 2 years training and go. And the joke about it, and I remember in 2015 or 2016, Donald Trump, for example, was saying, we're going to build walls and we're going to prevent refugees from coming in. And the joke was that he was tweeting about it from his iPhone. And the very iPhone that he was using was created by a son of a Syrian migrant, Steve Jobs. And Steve Jobs was the son of a Syrian migrant. I mean, I cannot understand how logic is.
One thing is, remember this question, who is a refugee? It's not about numbers, it's not about refugees, it's about the life people are leading as refugees. What is it to be a refugee? And unless we get our heads around what it is to be a refugee, we're not really getting to grips with it. So that's really important. So the Exodus series, I think, is a major step in getting that across to people. I just wanted to add something about the people whose right to be left out of the debate, and that's asylum seekers. The treatment of asylum seekers in the UK is absolutely disgraceful. It's a scandal what's happening to asylum seekers. They have no rights apart from having their case heard. They can't work. They're kept on very low allowances. Many of them are kept in detention centres. So let's not forget the rights of asylum seekers. Yeah.
Thank you. So I'd like to open to questions from the audience now on anything that we've heard so far. There's a lady over there. Can you wave your hands? Can you wave your hand? Thank you. And then we'll take a question over here.
It was mentioned that refugees are, by definition, people who are basically fleeing torture, violence, or any form of non-human treatment, to actually seek refuge in a country where good treatment is provided and rights are protected. The main issue that is very much undermined, especially in the West, when we talk about specifically the Syrian refugee crisis, is that the country which has the highest refugee per capita in the world, which is Lebanon, is hosting an exceeding number of refugees and is not basically providing them with their rights. So the issue here is to also talk about the situation whereby refugees are fleeing a country that is not considered safe to go to another country where they are not feeling safe. And the result is that European countries are providing a lot of funds, and INGOs are basically establishing themselves and providing a source of income to many foreigners who would actually go and live in the Middle East, while they are blocking the borders. And then they accuse countries like Lebanon of lack of freedom, which I agree of, but then the contradiction and the irony, as you have also discussed, is that like refugees are basically used as a tool by both states that lack basic freedoms and democracy, but also states that claim to be very democratic and developed.
Thank you. And the second question?
Thank you for your contributions. They're all valuable. And my question is somehow related to the first question. So Ms. Guild has talked about the registration process of a refugee in, let's say, the UK. A refugee arrives in the airport, and it takes about 2 weeks for them to be, for their forms to be processed. But in Turkey, it's quite of a mess, and the refugees who arrive in Turkey are not given a clear status, and it takes a long time for them to be registered, or it takes a lot of dramatic steps for them to be seen as refugees. My point here is, so it's to all of you. When Turkey has about 5 million refugees and Europe has only about 5 million refugees, do you think it's feasible for Turkey to spare that time registering every refugee and spending that amount of labor on registering every refugee one by one? And when refugees come to the Turkish border in mass and thousands of people at one time, whereas in the UK or in France or in Germany, they come in airports and they are coming in the airports with smaller numbers. Is it possible for Turkey to monitor this process easily? And I know that Turkey has a directive dealing with the refugee crisis, but do you think that the 3 billion euros that we're going to leave to Turkey by the European Union to solve the refugee crisis is enough? Because I personally think it's not enough, and I don't think that Turkey has a very bad record, but Europe is not doing enough to help Turkey deal with the process. Thank you.
Thank you. So the rights and registration of refugees in countries like Lebanon and Turkey, what's that?
Yes, I would start with the bad practices of the European Union, including ourselves here in the UK, and that is the attempt to create a principle out of the idea that refugees are not entitled to secondary movement. And secondary movement is, for instance, a Syrian who's in Lebanon, who's got virtually nothing, and who moves on to the UK or to elsewhere in Europe. And this idea of onward movement, a secondary movement, as being the most heinous crime that a refugee can possibly commit, is one of, it is a true shame for all of us. Of course, refugees who are not receiving proper protection and reception where they are must be entitled to move on to receive that protection elsewhere, and particularly that reception. This idea that this is somehow an ignoble secondary movement should be expunged from our way of thinking about refugees and asylum seekers. And that includes in respect of refugees who are also moving on from Turkey, a system where you have a fairly sclerotic asylum system, very much like Greece, where decisions just aren't being taken. Of course people should be able to move on. Of course they shouldn't be expected to remain in horrific conditions in a state which is unwilling, unable, or just not doing its job in terms of providing them with reception. And I think that when we speak of responsibility sharing around the world, one of the things which we must bear in mind is that the people who are suffering are those who are entitled to our responsibility, even when they're moving onwards from somewhere which perhaps they're not being persecuted, but where they still need protection. And group protection for them, I think, is a very easy solution as well.
So should we always think of the category of refugee is related to the situation in the country of the person's habitual residence or citizenship, or can their refugee status be related to the country in which they're currently residing, e.g. Turkey or Lebanon, that kind of thing?
Of course, in Turkey or Lebanon, neither state has ratified the Refugee Convention, so they're not refugees in either of those two countries because the two countries don't have the status. Instead, they're providing a temporary protection scheme in Turkey in particular, a series of different kinds of schemes in Lebanon, but they're not refugees. Durable solutions mean refugees have protection.
I won't comment on Turkey actually, it's just go back to what you said about the UK. Asylum seeker arriving at the UK airport will have their case dealt with in 2 weeks. I'd like to know who that is, because they don't. It can take years and years to get refugee status in the UK. And people go through a tremendous fight. The UK getting refugee status is a very hard slog, and it can take a very long time.
Yeah, to answer your question, I'm not really going to directly answer your question, and even if I understood it correctly, but I do agree. I mean, in terms of Lebanon, Lebanon has done a tremendous job because they host over 1 million people, and if you look at the politics that country, Syria, has occupied that country for a long time. There's a lot of grievances from different parts, of the society. So I agree, it's problematic. But again, if you look at the refugees, and let's remove all these figures and numbers, they are faceless. Who is a refugee? At the end of the day, a refugee is a human being. He's a father, he's a mother, he's a student, he's an engineer, he's a lover, he's a dreamer, he's an entrepreneur. He's just a person because of the current situation with his home. He fled and he cannot go back. So as a human nature, okay, when you are in the kind of survival mood, all you care about is food, water, and shelter, the survival needs. But again, as a human being, you do care about not only surviving but striving. There are many people here in this room who came from Australia, or came from Mozambique, or came from Morocco, or even from Lebanon, right here, because you want to thrive, you need to get an education, you need a better future, and I think this is the same applies to refugees or whatever, because if you remove the word of refugee, it could be me, it could be you, well, it's already me, so it could be you or whatever. So and again, it's very important to focus on this, because a lot of people say, okay, well, these are refugees and they're in a very difficult situation. But again, for how long? Because if you sit there at the refugee camp waiting for help, it will never come. It will never come. And this is why this definition between bad refugees and good refugees comes. If you wait patiently, hoping that you'll be resettled, through the UN. And again, this is a very, the likelihood that you do is very small. But if you make the journey yourself, then you will be accused of being, a queue jumper or whatever. This is really problematic, because whatever you do, you will be blamed of you. Because, and again, just give you on a practical level, in many countries, and this is a lot of refugees, and asylum seekers face. For example, if you go to work where you're living as an asylum seeker or let's say refugee, if you go to work, people would accuse you of stealing their jobs. If you do not go to work, people accuse you of sitting and abusing their hospitality. Yeah. So it's problematic. It's really problematic, and the policy is really very problematic. And commenting on your point of Turkey, if you're asking me as a Syrian person, how do you see this? Let's look, Gaddafi in the old days, he used to threaten Italy. Look, I'm going to open the borders. So humans were used as bargaining chips. If I'm not happy, I'm just going to open the border. Okay, here are 20, 30 boats. In 2015, there was a a study done, I think, by the University of Oxford, where they mentioned that in Turkey alone, over 500 million US dollars were generated from smuggling. I mean, if you use your mind and if you use your logic, you can smuggle 1, 2, 3, 20, 1,000 people. You cannot smuggle 5 million people. This is illogical. It means that there is a systematic policy by some governments to play this, because you give me money, okay, I'll look after it. And the way that I see it, and they mentioned that in refuge, that because they are coming from Muslim majority countries, that look, I'll take it, I'll give you the money, you keep the money, and you deal with it. This is your problem. I mean, this is kind of more blatantly how I'm going to put it.
Yeah, take a couple more questions. That lady there with the grey jumper. Number one. And behind the lady with the black jumper.
Hi, I wanted to talk about diversity because I think that before we talked about the fact that there is no bureaucratic path for example, economic migrants, like environment migrants, like development migrants. I think that a big issue in that case is clandestinity, because I think that at a certain point, I'm from Bristol, for example, when migrants arrive to Italy, and after a while they find out that there is no bureaucratic path for them, because they're not there for international protection or for subsidiarity protection or whatever, they understand that their request will be rejected, and so they turn to clandestinity. And from there to human trafficking or to other issues like that. And for me, it's crazy that those governments that condemn those illegal trafficking and things like that are the first through regulations and institutions to push the people into the arms of those situations.
Thank you. The problem of clandestine migrants and the lady now.
I would like to ask a question in regards to the rise of extreme right and racism, to the question of refugees that come from Eastern Europe. And whenever I had this conversation, sometimes I encountered a real wave of hope that they should go to the countries where they have more cultural similarities. So I want to ask you, and my answer was, but look at it as a human being, it's from a humanitarian point of view, but not always it kind of fell on the spiritual soul. So I wonder from your personal experiences, what would be, whenever you had these conversations, what was the best way to persuade them about the right cause? Yeah.
Thank you very much. So I'll put those two questions to the panel, and if you'd like to give us your final word for tonight, we'll start with Elspeth.
Yes. What to do about irregularly present migrants? One of the things which the Council of Europe is particularly concerned about is how to ensure that irregularly present migrants can actually access the human rights to which they are entitled. Access to housing, to food, to healthcare, to education, to labour protection rights insofar as they may be working. And I think this is one of the issues that we absolutely have to come to terms with. And we'll need the international community to recognise its obligations in respect of irregular present migrants to their human rights in the same manner as anyone else is entitled to them, and to move away from ideas like the creation of a hostile environment to force people to leave or starve to death on the streets. In respect of the extreme right and racism, I'm extremely cognizant of our worries about Europe at the moment, our worries about certain results in elections. And I think that one of the things that we must take very seriously is the role of public leadership in respect of the rise of far right and racism. This doesn't come from nowhere. This comes from public leadership, which makes acceptable a whole series of ways of talking about other people, which are at least covert discrimination, if not overt discrimination. We need our public officials to be much more responsible in the ways in which they talk about refugees and migrants. And finally, I would end once again with the plea, can we please look at refugees as a magnificent opportunity for our future?
Thank you. Ben.
Little to add to that, I think Elspeth's absolutely right. The refugee question has been used as a political tool by the right in all sorts of places, not just in Eastern Europe, but in the UK during the Brexit campaign. So we know it's been exploited. So some degree of responsibility certainly falls upon a political leadership. On irregular migrants, we know, yes, the UK and other states are using a deterrence policy, which is not just the undocumented, but those who would be refugees. So it's hitting all parties. So we need to move away from the deterrence approach that's really dominating politics at the moment.
Thank you. And the last minute to Ahmad.
Yeah, I mean, to talk about irregular migrants, I mean, this is beyond my remit, so I'm not an expert, so I'm not going to address this. Hopefully, one day if I become an expert on this topic. But on the issue of racism and xenophobia, I mean, my personal experience in the last years that's been in this country, even from other friends, has been a fantastic experience. The media, because the news at the end of the day is all about fears, If there's no fear, there's no problems, there is no worse. I mean, the news won't work. Radio, newspapers won't work. The daily mail won't work. So, and again, I mean, there were recently, I think it was last year or something, and Amnesty International did a survey in Russia and Spain and the UK, and about 70% of people, the question was, would you welcome a refugee in your country? About 70% of people said, yes. This is fascinating. It was simple. It was like you're kind of want to help a human being at the end of the day. And my experience has been a great experience. I came to this country within 90 days. I got my refugee status. Initially I was detained, which was fine for 20 days. But even the detention center was compared to the Syrian prisons. It was really right. So 90 days ago, my refugee status. But after that, I got a scholarship, from SOAS and the same foundation to finish my master's in violence, conflict, and development. And then I managed to bring over my family. So things worked out very well for me. I lived with an English family for over 5 months. So it's been a great experience. And then again, it's the people, it's the normal human beings. In 2015, I remember the head of the UK government at that time was David Cameron, said, we are not taking in any Syrian refugees. We are the second biggest, international donors when it comes to the Syrian refugee crisis. We are not taking in any Syrian refugees. And suddenly we have the picture of that little child, Eli Kurdi, washed up the Syrian, the Turkish shore. And it was a massive, public interest that, no, we need to do something. And within 24 hours or 1 week, the UK said, we are taking in 20,000 Syrian refugees. Just overnight, from the same person, we are not taking one single person. And again, it's about the public leadership. This is about the human beings. Look at the politicians. Who are they? The other people who need you and others, we elected. They need us. Not that we need them. They do need us. So I think raising awareness, making it personal is very important. Because 65 million people, not 65 million people, it's one human being. It's a mother, it's a father. They just make it personal. We need to build this relational relationship. It's just a human being. It's not only space. And again, and this is an institution. I think I have a great hope in the youth, in the group, especially at university students, because you guys are going to be the force beyond change. In 5-10 years, you will be the leaders of this country and beyond. So you got the opportunity to bring about change. So seize the opportunity.
these words, who is a refugee? A refugee is a human being. Thank you very much.
Just one thing, just, on behalf of many Syrians, thank you very much, for taking the time to be here. It means a lot for many. It means that people are interested. So thank you very much for your time.